Flames devour her mountain home, thick smoke choking the wild air. "Hannah, my daughter, no!" she screams, collapsing into the ash. Her world shatters. Then, a grizzled mountain man emerges from the shadows, his eyes holding a secret. He makes a silent, impossible gesture. What he reveals next will redefine her understanding of hope and terror. Her life in the mountains, though solitary, had been a deliberate choice, a desperate flight from the harsh judgments and even harsher consequences of a world that offered little mercy to a woman alone with a child. She had sought refuge not just from the shadows of her past, but from the very breath of civilization, seeking solace in the silence of ancient pines and the protective embrace of towering peaks. Here, with Hannah, she had hoped to build a life unburdened, a sanctuary where her daughter could grow untouched by the bitter echoes of what came before. Each log laid, each stone placed, each harvest gathered from the thin soil was a promise whispered to the wind, a silent vow to protect the innocent light that was her little girl. The cabin itself was more than wood and mortar. It was a shield, a dream, a fragile haven where two lost souls might finally find peace. Sarah pushed her weary horse to a gallop, the last mile a blur of frantic hope and dawning dread. The smoke, thin at first, now billowed thick and black, a funereal shroud against the azure. Her heart, which had thrummed with the anticipation of Hannah's laughter, now beat, a frantic, trapped rhythm against her ribs. She remembered the sweet, earthy smell of the hearth fire, the way the light played on Hannah's hair as she read by its glow. She pictured the small, hand-carved bird Hannah cherished, nestled on a shelf, a tiny beacon of their simple joys. These images flickered, mocking her, as the awful truth unfolded before her eyes. When she finally broke through the tree line, her horse rearing back in alarm at the heat, her world, so carefully built, dissolved into a landscape of ash and despair. The cabin was no more, a twisted skeleton of timbers smoldering amidst black rubble. The porch swing, where Hannah loved to watch the deer, lay shattered. The small garden, a testament to Sarah's tender care, was trampled and scorched. The air shimmered with residual heat, carrying the scent of burnt dreams and vanished innocence. It was a silence deeper than any mountain stillness, a silence that screamed of violation and loss. A guttural cry, more animal than human, tore from Sarah's throat, unheard in the vast emptiness. She stumbled from her horse, knees sinking into the soft, soot-stained earth. With bare, trembling hands, she clawed at the smoking debris, heedless of the lingering heat, a desperate prayer for a miracle forming on her lips, even as she knew its futility. She called Hannah's name, a raw, piercing sound that fragmented into the indifferent wind. The vast wilderness, once her trusted confidant and protector, now seemed to mock her pain, an impartial observer to her utter devastation. There was no sign, no trace, no whisper of her daughter. This was not the random cruelty of a passing storm or a desperate act of forgotten men. This was a deliberate, targeted vengeance, a meticulous destruction designed to eradicate every memory, every comfort, every fragile hope she had dared to cultivate. The very precision of the ruin spoke of a chase that had relentlessly tracked her to the very edge of the known world, a chilling reminder that some debts, though unpaid by her own hand, demanded a brutal, inescapable reckoning. The outlaws from whom she had fled, those spectral figures from a forgotten life, had found her, and in doing so, had left her with nothing but the suffocating weight of her own failure. In that moment of absolute desolation, as the last flicker of hope threatened to extinguish itself entirely, a figure detached itself from the ancient shadows of the pines. He moved with the quiet grace of a predator, yet carried an air of stillness, watching her, not with pity, but with the calm, austere understanding of one who knew intimately that nature and humanity alike were capable of relentless, unforgiving cruelty. The mountain man had arrived. The mountain man emerged, a silhouette against the harsh, unforgiving peaks, his frame carved from the very rock and shadow of the wilderness he inhabited. He did not approach with haste or offer words of solace. His presence was simply there, as immutable as the granite cliffs. Sarah, engulfed by the inferno of her grief, barely registered his arrival beyond a primal awareness of another sentient being in her shattered world. Her hands, scraped raw and blackened, continued their frantic, futile search through the smoldering ruins, a desperate dance with ashes, each breath a choked sob. The vastness of her loss was a physical weight, pressing down on her, threatening to crush the very will to stand. Her mind reeled, grasping for answers, for someone to blame, for an enemy tangible enough to confront. Was this silent watcher connected to the devastation? Was he another predator in a world that had suddenly turned on her? Suspicion, cold and sharp, began to cut through the fog of despair. Yet, his gaze held no malice, only the stark understanding of one who had witnessed countless acts of nature's brutality and man's darker impulses. He stood, a silent sentinel, allowing her moment of utter brokenness to unfold, perhaps recognizing that some wounds must first be fully acknowledged before any path to healing can be contemplated. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he lifted a hand, gesturing not towards the charred remains of her home, but upwards, towards the jagged, snow-capped summit that loomed above the valley. His voice, when it came, was a low rumble, like the grinding of ancient stones, carrying the scent of pine and crisp mountain air. He simply stated that they had arrived with the first blush of dawn. He did not elaborate on who they were, for there was no need. The implication hung heavy in the smoke-laden air, a chilling confirmation of the merciless outlaws from whom Sarah had relentlessly fled, those specters of a past she had hoped to outrun. His words were not an accusation, but a statement of undeniable, brutal fact, painting a clearer, more terrifying picture of the premeditated destruction. In that single, understated revelation, a truth more profound than the visible devastation began to unfold. Josiah, the lone watchman of these forgotten valleys, possessed eyes that saw far more than the average man. Drawn by a sound that had pierced the pre-dawn stillness, the small, terrified cry of a child, he had descended from his silent vigil. He had been a phantom in the tree line, a fleeting shadow, just minutes before the outlaws, wild-eyed and reckless, had hurled their flaming torches. He had seen the terror in Hannah's eyes, a flicker of pure innocence against the backdrop of approaching fire. It was then, in a desperate, silent act of defiance against the encroaching chaos, that he had reached for her, sweeping her from the doomed cabin and spiriting her away, a whisper in the wind. Even as the flames began their hungry ascent, he had then watched, powerless and grim, as the only home she had ever known was devoured by the inferno. He knew the faces of those who had brought this ruin, and he understood the cold, relentless pursuit that had led them to this hidden corner of the world. A tremor, violent and unexpected, shook Sarah to her core. Not a tremor of fear, but of a hope so fragile, so audacious, it felt like a betrayal of the ashes at her feet. Her daughter, Hannah. Alive. The world tilted on its axis, the searing grief suddenly battling with a surge of violent, dizzying relief. Every fiber of her being screamed for confirmation, for proof, for the sight of her child. The mountain man, sensing the shift, offered no further words, but turned, his gaze fixed on the rocky path leading up towards the crags. It was an unspoken summons, an imperative. Sarah, though her limbs felt like lead, and her heart threatened to burst from her chest, followed. She climbed, stumbling over roots and loose stones, driven by a force far greater than her exhaustion. The mountain, once a barrier, now became a ladder to a potential miracle. She noticed the deep lines etched around Josiah's eyes, the quiet strength in his weathered hands as he effortlessly navigated the treacherous ascent. He was a man of the wild, unburdened by the niceties of civilization, yet there was a primal protectiveness in his stride, a stoic guardianship that now extended to her and her child. The air grew thinner, sharper, carrying the clean scent of rock and ice. The climb was arduous, testing every sinew, but the image of Hannah, alive and safe, propelled Sarah onward. She pushed past the burning in her lungs, the ache in her muscles, the raw fear that still gnawed at the edges of her relief. With each upward step, she left behind the smoldering ruins of her past, the tangible symbol of all she had lost, and moved towards an uncertain future, clinging to the thread of hope the mountain man had so unexpectedly offered. The path grew steeper, winding through narrow crevices and past ancient, gnarled pines that clung to the stone. Josiah moved with an almost ethereal silence, his heavy boots making barely a sound. Finally, they reached a shadowed alcove, hidden behind a thick curtain of wild vines that hung like a verdant shroud. The mountain man pushed them aside, revealing a dark, yawning maw in the rock face. A cave. This was his sanctuary, his fortress. As Sarah peered into the cool darkness, a faint, rhythmic sound reached her ears, the soft, steady breathing of a sleeping child. It was the sound of life, of hope, a lullaby whispered by the mountain itself. She stood at the precipice of a new, unknown existence, her old world utterly destroyed, and this new one, born of ash and fire, and the silent strength of a stranger, beckoning her inward. The path behind her was gone, consumed by flames, and the only way forward was into the heart of the mountain, into the care of this enigmatic man. Inside the cool, silent depths of the cave, Hannah lay curled on a bed of thick furs, her small chest rising and falling in the deep, untroubled sleep of a child exhausted by fright. The sight of her daughter, untouched and unharmed, sent a wave of relief through Sarah, so profound it brought her to her knees. The fierce, violent grief that had consumed her moments before evaporated, replaced by an equally potent, dizzying gratitude. She knelt beside her, brushing a tendril of hair from Hannah's peaceful face, tears finally falling, not of sorrow, but of a joy so intense it was almost painful. This was the miracle she had prayed for, granted by the most unlikely of saviors. Josiah watched from the mouth of the cave, his presence a silent, immovable anchor against the chaos of the outside world. He offered no words, no comfort, yet his quiet vigilance was a solace in itself. His sanctuary was stark, built for survival, not sentiment. There was a small, smoldering fire in a stone hearth, its warmth chasing away the mountain chill. Simple tools hung from pegs, and bundles of dried herbs dangled from the cavern ceiling, filling the air with a faint, earthy aroma. It was a place stripped bare of pretense, a refuge forged by a man who had long since learned to rely only on himself and the unyielding mountain. Sarah, though overwhelmed, understood the unspoken language of this place. She was a trespasser, a sudden intrusion into a life of solitude. Josiah's gaze, though not unkind, held a question, a silent assessment. He was a man of the wild, a reclusive spirit, and her arrival, with a child in tow, was an upheaval of his ordered, solitary existence. She felt the weight of her presence, the unspoken challenge she presented to his carefully constructed peace. Yet, there was nowhere else to go. The world below, her past, was ashes. The mountain man, for all his austere silence, was her only hope. He moved then, with the fluid grace of a mountain cat, fetching dried meat and a skin of water, setting them near the fire. He motioned for Sarah to eat, his eyes conveying a simple, undeniable truth. Sustenance was paramount. As she slowly chewed the tough, smoked meat, its flavor a grounding reality after the day's horrors, she observed him, his hands, calloused and strong, moved with purpose. His face, weathered by sun and wind, told a story of hardship and resilience. He was a man shaped by the wilderness, a protector by instinct, yet also a soul marked by profound loneliness. Sarah felt her own wounds begin to throb, now that the immediate threat was gone. The raw scrapes on her hands, the bruises on her knees, the deep ache in her heart. She looked at Josiah, a stranger who had saved her daughter, and knew she could not impose on his generosity without offering something in return. This was the mountain way, a silent exchange, a balance. She could not articulate the words, but the understanding passed between them, unspoken and clear. She was no fragile thing to be pitied. She was a survivor, albeit a wounded one, capable of contributing, of earning her place. Days bled into a timeless blur within the cave's embrace. Josiah, a phantom of efficiency, tended to Sarah's injuries with herbal poultices, hunted game for their meager meals, and ensured the warmth of the fire never faltered. He was a guardian, a silent wall against the dangers that lurked beyond their hidden sanctuary. He spoke little, but his actions wove a tapestry of profound connection to the rhythm of life in the high peaks, and a loneliness that permeated his very being. The starkness of their new reality, born from fire and shadowed by unspoken threats, began to settle. Sarah, for her part, began to navigate this new, precarious existence. She watched Josiah, learning the subtle cues of his life, the unspoken rules of his mountain domain. She saw the profound solitude that had defined his years, a silence that he had, perhaps, never truly broken until now. Her presence, and more so Hannah's, was an anomaly, a disruption. The question of their future, of her next step, hung heavy in the air, a silent weight pressing down on the fragile peace. Then, one evening, as the last light faded from the cave mouth, painting the rock walls in hues of deep twilight, Josiah spoke, his voice low but firm. He gestured around the small, bare space, then towards the vast, unforgiving expanse outside. His words were few, but their meaning was clear. The mountain offered refuge, but demanded something in return. It was a place of work, of unending effort, of respect for its harsh laws. He offered shelter, a sanctuary from the relentless pursuit of her past, but not comfort. She could stay, he conveyed, but only if she understood that survival here was a partnership, a constant struggle against the wild, and that her utility, her contribution, and her adherence to the silent dictates of this savage place would be the true currency of her continued existence. His gaze, unblinking, met hers, sealing the unspoken pact. It was not an act of charity, but a stark, undeniable truth. The mountain would not suffer idleness, and neither would he. The initial days within Josiah's mountain sanctuary were a grueling apprenticeship for Sarah. She had always been capable, tending her own small farm, but the demands of this high-altitude existence were relentless and unforgiving. Josiah, a quiet observer, offered no quarter. He expected her to learn, to adapt, to contribute. He showed her how to prepare game, not just to cook it, but to skin it, clean it, and preserve it for the long winter months. He taught her the intricate pathways of the forest, which berries were safe, which roots were edible, and how to spot the signs of approaching storms, of tracking prey, of understanding the whispers of the wind. Her hands, once accustomed to the softness of cloth and the gentleness of her small garden, became calloused and strong. Her back ached from gathering firewood, her lungs burned from the thin, crisp air, yet she pushed herself, driven by a fierce determination to earn her place, not just for herself, but for Hannah. She would not be a burden. She would prove herself worthy of this unexpected salvation. Josiah, though still a man of few words, watched her efforts with a gaze that slowly shifted from assessment to something akin to quiet respect. He saw the resilience in her eyes, the steadfast resolve that mirrored his own. One cold morning, as an unexpected early snow began to fall, Hannah developed a cough, a rattling sound that sent a cold spear of fear through Sarah's heart. Josiah, usually stoic, seemed to hesitate, his brow furrowed with a concern he rarely showed. He offered a rough-hewn cup of bitter herbal tea, but the cough persisted, growing deeper. Sarah, however, remembered the old remedies her grandmother had taught her, remedies from a forgotten life, knowledge she had once considered simple folk wisdom, now suddenly invaluable. She remembered the specific blend of wild horehound and licorice root, gathered in late summer, boiled and steeped to soothe congested lungs. She knew these plants grew not far from the spring, even in the encroaching cold. Without a word, she bundled Hannah in furs and, with a silent nod from Josiah, ventured out into the swirling snow. She moved with a purpose he had not yet seen, her eyes scanning the frozen landscape for familiar shapes, her fingers carefully sifting through the icy undergrowth until she found the hardy, almost forgotten herbs. When she returned, chilled to the bone but triumphant, she prepared the remedy with a quiet expertise, the cave filling with the pungent, medicinal scent of the brewing concoction. Josiah watched, a flicker of surprise in his usually impassive eyes. He had offered what he knew, the strength of the mountains, but she had brought something else, a different kind of knowledge, a gentler, yet equally powerful, form of survival. As Hannah sipped the warm tea, her cough began to ease, her breathing growing less strained. The quiet efficiency of Sarah's actions, her innate understanding of healing and nurturing, spoke volumes. It was not the brute strength of a man, nor the cunning of a hunter, but the quiet, profound power of a woman, creating warmth and healing in a cold, harsh world. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the bare stone cave began to transform. Sarah found ways to make it more than just a shelter. She mended worn furs, turning them into softer blankets. She fashioned a small, crude broom from branches and kept the sleeping area clean, sweeping away the dust and grit. She used fallen pine cones and fragrant boughs to create a subtle, comforting scent that softened the cave's raw earthiness. With each small act, she was not just surviving, she was building, creating, bringing a sense of order and care to a place that had long known only the austere necessities of existence. The place that was once merely a refuge, a cold stone lair for a solitary man, now began to feel like a home. One afternoon, as Sarah meticulously mended a tear in one of Josiah's heavy deer-hide cloaks, his gaze fell upon her. She worked with a focused intensity, her fingers nimble, the needle a swift blur. He saw not just a refugee, but a woman of deep, untapped strength, a quiet force of creation. His cabin had been destroyed, but here, in his own hidden sanctuary, he saw the foundations of a new kind of home being laid, piece by meticulous piece, by her capable hands. He recognized then that her resilience was not simply about endurance, but about an active, tender reshaping of their stark reality. Just as a fragile sense of routine began to settle, a new disturbance arrived. One morning, the distant echo of a rifle shot fractured the mountain's stillness, too close for comfort. Josiah, ever vigilant, tensed, his eyes narrowing. Moments later, a figure emerged from the tree line below, a lone trapper known for his gruff demeanor and possessive nature over the best hunting grounds. The man, Old Man Silas, notorious for his distrust of strangers, especially those who encroached on his perceived territory, had seen the smoke from Sarah's former cabin and, driven by suspicion and a deep-seated resentment of any perceived intrusion, had followed the faint trail, discovering the faint traces of two women with the mountain man. His challenge was clear in his wary, hostile posture. The mountain had always been a domain for solitary men, and Sarah's presence, now a known factor, was a direct affront to the unwritten rules of their isolated world. He stopped, his rifle cradled in his arms, his eyes fixed on Sarah, an open question and a thinly veiled threat in their depths. Old Man Silas stood at the mouth of the cave, his eyes narrowed into slits of suspicion, his gnarled hand resting on the stock of his rifle. His gaze swept over Sarah, lingering on Hannah, then settled on Josiah with a silent accusation. The trapper's presence was a jagged disruption, a harsh reminder that even in this remote wilderness, the fragile peace they had found was never truly secure. He spoke, his voice raspy. accusing Josiah of harboring strangers, of upsetting the delicate balance of their solitary existence. Sarah felt a familiar dread coil in her stomach, the shadow of her past reaching even into this hidden sanctuary. Josiah remained silent, his stance unwavering, a formidable barrier between Silas and his new charges. He understood the unwritten code of the mountain men: fierce independence, distrust of outsiders, and a possessive guardianship over one's territory. Silas's challenge was not just verbal, it was a test of Josiah's resolve, a probe into the mountain man's unexpected decision to shelter a woman and a child. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with unspoken threats and the raw scent of pine. Then, a sudden, piercing shriek echoed from the depths of the cave. Hannah, startled by the raised voices, had woken from her nap and, disoriented and frightened, had fallen from her bed of furs, her head striking a sharp rock. Her cries were not merely of pain, but of primal terror. Sarah, abandoning all thought of Silas, rushed to her daughter's side. A gash bled freely from Hannah's temple, and her eyes were wide with shock. This was a crisis, immediate and undeniable, one that transcended the squabbles of men. Josiah, too, reacted with a swiftness that belied his usual measured pace. His eyes, usually distant, now held a focused intensity. He dismissed Silas with a sharp, dismissive gesture, his priority shifting entirely to the child. Sarah, drawing on an instinct born of desperation and deep love, immediately took control. She knew the urgency of stopping the bleeding, of assessing the injury. She barked instructions to Josiah, not with deference, but with the clear authority of one who understands the immediate needs of healing. She needed clean cloths, cold water, and the specific herbs she had gathered earlier, the ones that had eased Hannah's cough. Josiah, surprisingly, did not question her. He moved with an uncharacteristic urgency, gathering what she requested. As Sarah worked, her fingers deftly cleaning the wound, pressing a poultice to the cut, she talked to Hannah, her voice soft but firm, calming the terrified child. She wrapped Hannah's head with strips of clean linen, her movements precise and confident. Old man Silas, forgotten at the mouth of the cave, watched, his initial hostility giving way to a grudging fascination, a quiet acknowledgement of Sarah's unexpected competence in a moment of true peril. When Hannah's cries subsided into whimpers, her small hand clutching Sarah's, a profound quiet settled over the cave. The crisis had passed, and the immediate danger to Hannah's life had been averted by Sarah's quick thinking and gentle, yet decisive actions. It was in this moment of shared relief that the rigid walls between them began to crumble. Josiah, his face etched with concern, knelt beside Hannah, his rough finger gently brushing a tear from her cheek. He saw not just a child, but a fragility that resonated deep within his own guarded heart. He spoke then, his voice softer than Sarah had ever heard it, revealing a wound she had only glimpsed. He confessed to a past haunted by loss, a wife and child taken by the harshness of an early winter, victims of a disease he had been powerless to fight. His solitude, he revealed, was not merely a choice, but a penance, a retreat from a pain he believed he could never outrun. He had chosen the mountain to forget, to bury the ghosts of his past beneath layers of snow and silence. Sarah, her own heart overflowing with the raw aftermath of fear and relief, met his gaze, understanding blooming between them. She, too, confessed, her voice barely a whisper, the story of her own abandonment, of being cast out by her family, her community, for a transgression she could not control, leaving her with nothing but her daughter and the bitter taste of betrayal. She spoke of the relentless pursuit that had driven her into the wilderness, of the burning fear that had been her constant companion. They were two pariahs, two souls scarred by loss and rejection, finding in each other not just sanctuary, but a mirror of their own enduring pain. In that quiet moment, surrounded by the healing scent of herbs and the gentle crackle of the fire, their partnership was sealed, not by words of commitment, but by the shared weight of their vulnerabilities. They were not just a mountain man and a refugee, but two broken pieces beginning to fit together, forming a new, unexpected whole. Hannah, nestled safely between them, was the living embodiment of their fragile hope. But the mountain was a world of stark realities. As the cave settled back into its quiet rhythms, old man Silas, who had remained silent and observant, suddenly let out a low, unsettling chuckle. He had witnessed Sarah's quick, decisive actions, her unexpected knowledge of medicine, her quiet strength. He had seen the mountain man's rare vulnerability, his unspoken confession. There was an old tale, a whispered legend among the trappers, of a lost cache of ancient medicines, a potent collection of healing secrets, once belonging to a forgotten tribe, hidden somewhere in these very peaks. Silas, his eyes glinting with a dangerous avarice, saw in Sarah's skills not just compassion, but a key. He declared, with a sudden, chilling certainty, that her gifts would be far more useful to him than to a solitary recluse. His words hung in the air, a new and insidious threat, hinting at a darker, more personal danger than they had yet faced. The uneasy tension lingered after old man Silas departed, his words a venomous seed planted in the fragile soil of their newfound peace. Yet the immediate crisis had forged an unbreakable bond between Sarah and Josiah. The mountain cave, once a stark shelter, began to soften, transformed by shared moments of quiet intimacy and mutual care. They fell into a rhythm, an unspoken dance of survival and companionship. Josiah taught Sarah to set snares, to identify game trails, to read the nuanced language of the wind and snow. Sarah, in turn, showed him how to mend torn garments with nimble fingers, how to turn wild berries into soothing preserves, and how to tell stories that enchanted Hannah, bringing laughter to the usually silent cavern. They would often sit by the fire in the evenings, the only light flickering on the ancient rock walls, sharing the day's small triumphs and silent observations. Josiah, once so guarded, began to share fragments of his past, tales of his youth spent wandering the vast western plains before the mountains claimed him. Sarah, too, found herself recounting memories of her childhood home, the scent of lavender from her mother's garden, the distant chime of a church bell. These stories, woven into the fabric of their days, were threads that bound them tighter, creating a tapestry of shared understanding. Hannah, nestled between them, was the beating heart of their nascent family, her innocent presence a constant reminder of the life they were building. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Sarah helped Josiah mend a leaky spot in the cave's roof, she uncovered a small, leather-bound journal tucked away in a hidden crevice. It was old, its pages yellowed with age, filled with intricate drawings of local flora and fauna, alongside precise instructions for medicinal preparations. As she carefully turned the pages, her breath caught. There, sketched with remarkable detail, was a distinctive mountain flower, its name written below in elegant script, the weaver's bloom. It was a flower her own grandmother, a renowned herbalist in their distant village, had spoken of, a rare specimen said to hold potent healing properties. Her grandmother had worn a small, intricately carved wooden pendant depicting this very bloom, a family heirloom passed down through generations. Josiah watched her, a curious expression on his face. When she showed him the drawing, explaining its significance, his eyes widened with a rare astonishment. He explained that the journal had belonged to his own mother, a woman who had come to these mountains as a young healer, seeking refuge from a troubled past in a faraway land. She had been known for her unique remedies, her deep connection to the earth, and her uncanny ability to find the most hidden herbs. The pendant Sarah's grandmother had worn, he realized, was strikingly similar to a small, almost identical carving that his own mother had kept, a token from her own mother, who had been a gifted weaver and healer in their ancestral village. A profound realization dawned on them both. Their families, generations apart and separated by vast distances, had been connected by a shared lineage of healing, by an almost forgotten craft, and by the rare, symbolic weaver's bloom. Their meeting, far from being a mere accident of circumstance, felt like a whisper of fate, a weaving together of destinies that had long been subtly intertwined. It was as if the mountain itself, in its vast, timeless wisdom, had orchestrated their convergence, bringing two broken souls together to mend not just their lives, but the long severed threads of their ancestral paths. This discovery solidified their bond, giving their unlikely found family a deeper, almost mystical significance. But the peace of the high peaks, though profound, was always precarious. Just as the first light of true belonging began to illuminate their lives, a new shadow crept over the horizon. The very next morning, as Josiah set out to check his traps, he returned with a grim set to his jaw. A series of small, unnatural cairns, carefully stacked stones, had appeared along the outer perimeter of their valley. These were not the casual markers of wandering trappers or native hunters. They were deliberate, ominous signposts, placed with a chilling precision. They were symbols, ancient and unsettling, known only to those who hunted not for food, but for men, and in particular, for those who had debts to settle. They belonged to the ruthless band of outlaws who had burned Sarah's cabin, a chilling declaration that the chase was not over. Their sanctuary, they realized, had been found. The discovery of the cairns cast a pall over their fragile peace. The quiet domesticity of the cave, so carefully cultivated by Sarah, felt suddenly exposed, vulnerable. Josiah's face was grim, his eyes scanning the horizon with an intensity Sarah now recognized as a precursor to danger. The outlaws, the specters of Sarah's past, had found them. They hadn't just burned her cabin, they had tracked her, patiently, relentlessly, to the very heart of Josiah's mountain sanctuary. This was no longer a simple pursuit of vengeance. It was a deliberate invasion, a blatant challenge to the mountain man's domain. The air grew heavy with a palpable sense of dread. Sarah, who had once been a hunted victim, now felt a fierce, protective instinct surge through her. She was no longer running, she was defending. This new life, this found family with Josiah and Hannah, was too precious to surrender. They had built something real here, a haven born of shared sorrow and quiet strength, and she would fight for it. Josiah, for his part, became a man transformed. The quiet, reclusive shed, his reticence, his every movement radiating a coiled, predatory vigilance. He was not just defending his home, he was defending the future he had, perhaps unknowingly, begun to build. Over the next few days, the signs became undeniable. Small trails appeared near the spring, footprints that were too fresh, too numerous, to belong to lone hunters. The faint sound of distant axe work echoed from the lower slopes, a jarring intrusion into the mountain's natural symphony. Josiah confirmed their fears. The outlaws had set up a temporary camp, strategically positioned to cut off any escape routes down the valley. They were not merely passing through, they were laying siege. Their target was clear, not just the mountain man, but Sarah, and by extension, Hannah. They saw Sarah not as a woman seeking refuge, but as property, a prize to be reclaimed, a debt to be collected. One evening, as the last sliver of sunlight faded, a voice carried on the wind, echoing through the canyon. It was coarse, guttural, and chillingly familiar to Sarah. It belonged to Jeremiah, the brutal leader of the outlaw gang, the man whose shadow had haunted her for so long. He called out, his words laced with a cruel taunt, promising not just her capture, but a slow, painful destruction of everything she held dear, a terrifying echo of the fate of her former home. He made it clear that Josiah, the silent protector, was merely an obstacle, and if he stood in their way, he would suffer the same fate. Suddenly, a new, unforeseen element complicated their perilous situation. Through a crack in the cave wall, Sarah spotted a familiar, slumped figure tied to a tree at the edge of the outlaw camp, a silent, grim hostage. It was Old Man Silas. The trapper, who had tried to intimidate them just days before, was now a prisoner, a stark warning of the outlaw's ruthlessness. Jeremiah, it seemed, was not acting alone, or rather, his network extended further than they had imagined. Silas, with his deep knowledge of the mountain's secret paths, had likely been captured and coerced, forced to reveal vital information about the hidden cave, thus betraying the unwritten codes of the mountain dwellers. His presence revealed a second layer to the threat, a cunning intelligence at play, exploiting local knowledge to achieve its destructive aims. The thought of Hannah being taken, of falling into Jeremiah's hands, was a terror far worse than any death. Sarah felt a cold resolve harden within her. She would not allow it. Looking at Josiah, whose eyes reflected a steely determination, she knew they both understood the gravity of their predicament. The sanctuary was no longer safe. They could not outrun them, nor could they withstand a direct assault in their vulnerable position. A different kind of sacrifice was needed. As night fell, wrapping the mountain in a shroud of impenetrable darkness, Sarah made her choice. It was a decision born of fierce, desperate love and a profound understanding of the odds against them. To save Hannah, to protect the fragile life they had built with Josiah, she would give herself up. She would walk into the lion's den, offer herself as the sacrificial lamb, hoping that her surrender would buy them time, a chance for Josiah to escape with Hannah, to find a new, truly safe haven. It was a gamble with her very life, a desperate bid for the survival of the two people who had come to mean everything to her. She looked at Hannah, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the approaching storm, and then at Josiah, her eyes conveying the desperate, unwavering resolve that now fueled her. The unspoken message passed between them. She would go, alone, to face the demons of her past, hoping her sacrifice would pave the way for their future. The silence of the pre-dawn mountain was broken only by the crunch of Sarah's boots on the frozen earth. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and resolve. She moved with purpose, leaving the safety of Josiah and Hannah behind, making her way towards the faint glow of the outlaws' camp. This was her gamble, her desperate, sacrificial play. She would offer herself, hoping to draw their attention, to buy precious time for her new family to escape. The air was frigid, biting at her exposed skin, yet a burning determination pulsed within her. As she neared the camp, the harsh sounds of drunken revelry and coarse laughter reached her ears. Jeremiah, a hulking shadow by the central fire, sat surrounded by his men. She walked directly into the light, her silhouette appearing stark against the dark pines. A hush fell over the camp, the laughter dying as all eyes turned to her. Jeremiah, a cruel smile spreading across his scarred face, rose slowly, his gaze predatory and triumphant. He had found his prize. He approached her, his words a venomous sneer, declaring his victory, her capture, and the agonizing price she would pay for daring to escape him. But Sarah, though trembling, met his gaze with an unexpected defiance. She was no longer the cowering woman he remembered. She had found a new strength, a fierce inner fire forged in the crucible of the mountains. She used her words, sharp and deliberate, to expose his cruelty, to challenge his misplaced sense of ownership. She told him he would never truly possess her, not her spirit, not her will. Just as Jeremiah lunged, his hand reaching for her, a figure burst from the shadows with the force of a mountain storm. It was Josiah. He moved with a primal ferocity, a whirlwind of muscle and instinct, his eyes burning with a cold, unforgiving rage. He was not a man of refined combat, but a force of nature, using the terrain, his profound knowledge of the wild, and sheer, untamed strength. He threw one outlaw into a roaring fire, sent another sprawling with a swift, brutal kick, and used the very trees as weapons, slamming men against their unyielding trunks. Sarah, though terrified, was not idle. She had learned from Josiah, and from her own desperate struggle for survival. As the chaos erupted, she saw old man Silas, still bound to the tree, groaning softly. With a burst of adrenaline, she grabbed a discarded hunting knife, swiftly severing his ropes. Silas, though weak, was still a man of the mountain. He snatched his dropped rifle, turning it on the surprised outlaws, providing a crucial diversion, a momentary shift in the tide of the battle. His alliance, born of his own captivity, was an unexpected turning point. Jeremiah, enraged by Josiah's unexpected intervention, turned his full fury on the mountain man. The fight was brutal, a clash of two raw forces. Jeremiah, younger and fueled by a lifetime of violence, fought with reckless abandon. Josiah, older but imbued with the silent power of the wilderness, fought with precision and an unyielding will to protect. He dodged a wild swing, using Jeremiah's momentum against him, sending the outlaw stumbling towards the edge of a steep ravine. It was then that Sarah made her move. She saw the glint of Jeremiah's hidden dagger, an evil gleam in the firelight. Without hesitation, she screamed a warning to Josiah, but she did more than warn. Drawing on her intimate knowledge of the surrounding landscape, a skill honed by Josiah's teachings, she aimed a swift, powerful kick, not at Jeremiah, but at a loose pile of rocks near the ravine's edge. The small avalanche of stones tumbled down, not directly hitting Jeremiah, but forcing him to lose his footing on the treacherous ground, his balance momentarily broken. Josiah seized the opportunity. He did not deliver a killing blow. Instead, with a move born of years of trapping and outwitting prey, he entangled Jeremiah's legs with a discarded length of rope, sending him sprawling into the soft, thick mud at the bottom of the shallow ravine. He then lifted his heavy rifle, not to shoot, but to smash the butt against a nearby tree with a resounding crack, a sound that echoed like a shot, sending the remaining stunned outlaws scattering into the darkness of the woods. Believing their leader had fallen, they disappeared into the night, their bravado broken, their mission a failure. The camp was silent once more, save for the crackling fire and Jeremiah's furious, muffled curses from the bottom of the ravine. Josiah stood over him, rifle aimed, his face devoid of mercy, yet also of unnecessary brutality. He told Jeremiah, his voice low and dangerous, that this mountain would tolerate no more of his kind. He bound him tightly, leaving him for the local authorities who occasionally ventured into the foothills. He would not kill, not in cold blood, but he would ensure Jeremiah would never again threaten those he protected. The battle was won, the immediate threat neutralized. Sarah looked at Josiah, relief washing over her. But beneath it, a nascent understanding. The world was still dangerous. One outlaw had managed to escape, disappearing into the darkness, a faint whisper of unfinished business. And though Jeremiah was captured, the echoes of his violence, the trauma he inflicted, would linger. The mountain had witnessed their victory, but it also knew that peace, even in its most remote corners, was a hard-won, fragile thing, constantly needing vigilance. The seasons turned, painting the mountain in hues of green, gold, and finally, the pristine white of winter's embrace. A year had passed since the night of the confrontation, since the outlaws had been scattered and Jeremiah left for the justice of the lowlands. The old cave, once a temporary refuge, had become a beloved memory, a symbol of their beginning. Now, nestled in a sheltered valley a little further up the mountain, a new cabin stood sturdier, larger, built with both Josiah's strength and Sarah's practical wisdom. It was a home woven from hardship and hope, a sanctuary where life bloomed anew. Inside, the scent of fresh-baked bread mingled with the comforting aroma of burning pine. Hannah, a year older and brimming with mountain resilience, laughed as she chased a playful marmot through the sunlit clearing outside, her laughter echoing freely through the crisp air. Josiah, no longer a solitary specter, worked beside Sarah by the hearth, carving a small wooden bird for Hannah. His hands, once solely accustomed to traps and axes, now imbued with a newfound gentleness. His face, though still weathered, held a softened contentment, lines of sorrow replaced by faint crinkles of joy. He would often watch Sarah, a quiet admiration in his eyes, as she moved through their home, her presence filling every corner with warmth and life. Sarah, radiant with a quiet happiness, moved with a different grace now. Her movements were slower, more deliberate, a testament to the new life stirring within her. She was visibly pregnant, her hand often resting instinctively on her swelling belly, a silent promise of the future. The child, their child, was a tangible symbol of their journey, of two lost souls, finding each other, and choosing to create a legacy of love in a world that had tried to break them. The cabin was not just a structure of wood and stone, it was the embodiment of their shared dream, a testament to the power of a found family. One evening, as Josiah added another log to the crackling fire, Sarah recounted a story Hannah had recently heard from a passing trapper, a legend whispered amongst the mountain folk. It spoke of a brave woman, a mountain mother, who, against all odds, had faced down a notorious gang of outlaws, saving her child and bringing a kind of peace to the valley. The story had already taken on the exaggerated hues of folklore, attributing almost mythical powers to the woman and her silent, formidable protector. But what struck Sarah was a detail in the tale. The legend claimed the mountain mother had found her true strength by discovering an ancient lineage, a connection to the very first healers and protectors of these lands, a line that had faded until her arrival. Josiah listened, a rare smile playing on his lips. He then presented Sarah with a small, intricately carved wooden pendant, the one his own mother had cherished, bearing the symbol of the weaver's bloom, almost identical to her grandmother's. This was not just a gift, it was a revelation. His mother, the gentle healer who had fled to these mountains, had been not just a refuge seeker, but a direct descendant of that very same ancient lineage. Sarah, with her innate healing touch, her deep connection to the land, and her fierce protective instinct, had not simply found a home in the mountains. She had returned to her ancestral roots, unknowingly fulfilling a prophecy whispered through generations. Their shared heritage, intertwined through the weaver's bloom, had not just brought them together but had cemented their place as the new guardians of the mountain. The mountain, a silent witness to their journey, now cradled their new home, a beacon of hope against the vast wilderness. It stood as a testament to the quiet strength of ordinary souls, to the enduring power of connection, and to the profound truth that home is not merely a place, but the haven found within another's heart. In this remote valley, far from the judgments and cruelties of the outside world, they had forged a new path, proving that true courage is found not in conquest, but in the unwavering love that builds, protects, and ultimately redeems. Their story was a whisper on the wind, a legend in the making, carried by the soaring eagles and the ancient pines, a tale of survival, of healing, and of the profound, transformative power of finding one's true family amidst the wild, unforgiving beauty of the high peaks. Did you enjoy this journey? Tell us from what corner of the world you're watching this story from. Leave your comment, and to make sure you don't miss the next adventure, subscribe to the channel.